Our final speaker, Carolyn Alderson, who's Acting Head of Licensing at GIST Collections. Carolyn's going to be telling us about a GIST pilot to extend access to academic research content to NHS users.
Thank you. Now, this pilot has developed really out of the Finch report that came out in 2012, and they made a recommendation that during the transition to open access, we should find a way really to enable access to academic research content and other content to those sectors that don't have access. And it was also mentioned that funds should be found to cover that access and to rationalise the licensing around it. But in order to do that, it was necessary to find some funding, and an amount was suggested of between 1 and 2 million relating to the NHS that would allow access to that content to pay for it to content that was required. And so the idea would be to make available access to as many journals as possible. Now, really at the time that that happened, of course, no funding was available. So the whole idea of how to move that forward was a bit of a challenge. So where does GIST fit into this picture? Well, GIST Collections does already license research content for the academic community under the Nestle 2 brand. And we had also engaged in a pilot called the AHSC pilot, the Academic Health Science Centres pilot, during 2011 to 12. And that was actually still underway at the time the Finch report came out. So that was about extending access to Nestle content with 5 publishers listed here, and also involving 5 AHSCs, as they were called at the time. So 5 university medical schools and their associated NHS trusts, essentially, were involved in this pilot. And the usage analysis showed that in a comparative sense against the academic usage of the same content, that the NHS trust use was really quite low. And so when the Finch report came out, it was perhaps considered, well, we can use this model to build on. It's not going to be exactly the same, but we do have some experience. And so that's what we took forward. But of course, thinking about enabling access to the whole of the NHS was a slightly different kettle of fish. It involved the NHS in England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, and they all do purchase content really in a different way, and they access content in a different way, and they have engaged with GIST Collections and GISC in a different way. So getting that partnership going and together and quite focused did take some time, at a time as well when in the NHS there was an awful lot of change going on and some decisions just couldn't be made. And the steering group developed really out of a focus group which first determined which content might be relevant to be involved in a pilot that would enable access for the NHS. And the steering group members are representatives from the NHS in each country, plus NICE, who are involved at a national level. They procure for England national content, and also UCL, who had been part of the AHSC pilot. And the chair of that group is Paul Aris from UCL, and he's also chair of the Electronic Information Resources Working Group for GIST Collections. So really that group determined the content by comparing what they already had access to through the national provision and in Scotland and Wales, what they were already accessing, comparing it with the Nestle content to really come up with a list that would be relevant. But of course there was still the issue of the pilot funding, because there wasn't any money, the NHS had no funding. And so it was with some relief really that an anonymous donor came forward with some funding, which it was agreed by the group would be used to administer the pilot, to provide funds to the publishers to help actually manage, set up access, provide usage data. It wasn't about funding to buy the content. This is really important. We didn't want to put any figure there. We didn't, although the Finch report had mentioned a figure, it wasn't absolutely clear really whether the usage would show for the research content that that was the relevant figure, and I'll mention that later. So, developing the NHS pilots involved a fairly formal and official process whereby initially we sent out a request for information to publishers back in June last year. And that was really to try and understand what the issues were for the publishers, what was important to them before we really sent out the invitation to tender. And what came back, perhaps not surprisingly, was that most of the publishers were really concerned about the subscription revenue, that if they opened up access to all their content, which was what we were asking them to do, that the NHS trusts might cancel some of their content in the knowledge that they were going to have access to it anyway. So we had to play this very carefully because we certainly didn't want that to happen because we knew then we would have no publishers in the pilot. So we took that on board and then sent out an official invitation to tender where we specified the requirements really, that we were able to provide some administrative funding if they could open up access to the content by Open Athens authentication. That is how the NHS mostly accesses the content. So that's that was the main specification, really, in terms of being able to receive some of the funding and also to provide the usage data at 2 points. But we were aware that perhaps not all the publishers were going to be able to provide Open Athens, so we also incorporated IP address access as well. And it was good to see in October 2013 that the Finch review of the report, reviewing the Finch report, actually said, we welcome the work that JISC is doing to investigate options for extensions to licensing. So the publishers were decided through this process, and you can see them listed here. We are very pleased that they're in the pilots, 3 of them by Open Athens authentication and 3 by IP address. And we're in the period now where the pilot has started officially, but we're still ironing out a few areas of access with a few of the publishers, but the NHS trusts have essentially got access to the content now and the pilot has started. This is the timetable, so you can see where we are. 1st of April, access started, and then there will be a process of gathering the usage data, doing an analysis, reports, and meetings with the parties, with a final report due in July 2015. And just to finalise, I'm just going to run through those publishers and what they're offering for the pilot. We've got Springer, nearly 2,000 journal titles, plus they're including ebooks and protocols. Elsevier, 146 research titles. Nature Publishing Group, there are 37 Nature-owned titles, plus other society and academic journals. An IOP, 100 journal titles, RSC, 57 titles, and AAAS with 2 significant titles, Science Signalling and Science Translational Medicine. And I'd like to thank you for listening. If you want to find out more about the pilot, we have a couple of web pages on the JISC Collections website with these URLs shown here. And please do go and see, we're adding information there daily. And if you want to ask me any questions, please do contact me by my email address. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Carolyn. I think we've probably just got time for a quick question if anybody's got one. I don't know if they want to. No, don't think so. I think everyone's too keen to get to their drinks and nibbles. Okay, well, thank you very much, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye.